we'll start with recapping from last class, what we were talking about last class. So we were talking about the binding of Yitzchok. Hashem commands Yitzchok to bring his dearest son, Yitzchak, as a sacrifice. And of course, we discussed what a tremendous challenge this is. It goes against his whole personality. He is the epitome of chesed, of kindness, of giving, goes against his entire purpose that he lives for. What's his whole goal in life is spreading the name of Hashem. And this is completely going against everything. So we have this idea where Avram, it's a tremendous, tremendous test for Abraham, to go against his character, to go against everything that he believes in order to fulfill Hashem's command. And we said, what is the purpose of a test? That's what we were discussing last time. So just to recap a few of the points, not everything, but we discussed that it is to bring something from potential to actuality, that someone could have inside of them, the power to do something, but it doesn't mean that they actually carry it out and do it. When you're tested, you actually bring it into actuality. And so it's for the good of the one being tested, because then he sees that he can do it. He can also get rewarded for it. We also discussed it brings out the essence of your neshama, the deepest, deepest core part, because when you're tried, that's when your deepest resources, come out and you're able to reveal the deepest part of your neshama. We also discussed the medrash, the Hemekadavar brings in the medrash, which brings in 3 different parables. We compared it to a pot. You can bang a pot just to see how strong it is. So it's just to test how strong are you. Sometimes Hashem gives you a test just to test how strong you really are. And then we said it could be like flaxseed. Flaxseed, the more you work at it, the more you refine it, the better the product is going to be. So the more we're tested, the better, the more refined we become through that. And then we discussed it could be like a donkey where you're just carrying the burden of the generation. Sometimes Hashem tests a tzaddik who is in position as a leader, and that is just to carry the burden of the Jewish people because they're deserving of punishment, and then he can get the reward for himself and for them. So that was another idea that we brought in. We also discussed that it's to be a banner, to be an example for all the other nations of our commitment to serve Hashem and how to serve Hashem, etc. So we left off with this idea of, that what was the big thing for Abraham? The big thing was Kabbalah soul, accepting the yoke of heaven. That for most people, that would be the big thing, just listening to Hashem's word. But for Avraham, that wouldn't be the case because he was a chariot of Hashem. And there's a real tzaddik, they automatically, the avos, all three of our patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchok, and Yaakov, they all automatically wanted to do the will of Hashem because they were like a chariot to Hashem. And the chariot has no will of its own, he only has the will of Hashem. So therefore, that basic idea that other people have to, just accept the yoke of heaven. And like we said, when we were given the Torah, what do we say first? Na'aseh v'nishma. First we'll do, and then we'll listen. First, it's just that idea. No, God, whatever you say, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm committed to you. It doesn't need to make sense to me. I don't need to listen and hear the reasoning because that's irrelevant. I am serving you regardless of all of that. So that doesn't apply here because Avraham is a chariot to Hashem. So we said that for him, his purpose was that he wasn't going to test Hashem. And we said for Yitzchok, So for Avram, it contradicted, and therefore the fact that he didn't answer back and say, wait a second, this contradicts what I've learned. But we see that for Yitzchak, he wasn't promised anything. So he didn't have the same struggle. And then we got into a discussion of, well, who is it really harder for? Is it really harder for Avram or for Yitzchak? So if someone wasn't on last class and they want to share their opinion, if they think it's harder for Avram or they think it's harder for Yitzchak, you can put your thumbs up for Avram and your thumbs down for Yitzchak, whoever you think. And then we'll continue that discussion. Does anyone want to voice their opinion or share, some insight on whether you think it was harder for Avraham or for Yitzchak?
Yitzchak.
Okay, why do you feel that, Susan?
I think because he was a child, and how much understanding could he have? I mean, he would always do what his father would tell him. I mean, he was obeying, and he would never go against his father. And if his father said jump in the lake, he would jump in the lake. In other words, he was obeying what his father, and he knew his father knew best and what the best thing to do, and what he would always do what his dad would say, which is mostly the same as most children. And, as you grow up, if your father's a righteous person, you try to do what he says. Sometimes he's not right, but, in this case, I mean, it was a test of both of them. Obviously, a huge test, but.
Right. Okay, so you think it was harder for him to follow blindly his father in this case. So are you saying because Avram was commanded by Hashem and Yitzchak was not commanded by Hashem?
Yes, I would say yes.
Okay. So that was one of the ideas. So we're going to contrast. So on the one hand, it's harder for Yitzchak. We'll start with that because that's where Susan voted. So Yitzchak, that's the first point, that he wasn't commanded directly by Hashem. So if you're told, even if something's really hard, but if Hashem even appeared to any of you and you really knew it was Hashem and you weren't like, I don't know, maybe this is some message. I'm talking directly. Hashem came and spoke to you and said, this is what you have to do. As hard as it may be, I think that a lot of people would pass that. I mean, whatever. On the one hand, yes, one hand, no, depending what he's telling you. But it's so much easier if you're being told directly by Hashem. You can't compare. So,
yes, but wasn't the problem also?
I only heard half of your question, Sarah. Wasn't the problem also? Do you want to finish the question? I'm not able to hear you. Okay, maybe she's having some technical difficulties. When you're able to, you could type it in the chat also if you want.
Okay.
So that's the first point. He wasn't commanded by Hashem directly. And the second point is people say, well, it's harder for Yitzchak because he's actually the one dying. Abraham is sacrificing, but Yitzchak is the one who's giving up his life. And the third reason why it's harder for Yitzchak is because he had to live through it. You know what I'm saying? He had to be there and have it done to him. Now, there's a lot of reasons why it's harder for Avraham. It says that for Avraham, he was promised that he would have children, so he had to ignore it. Contradicted what he was told. For Yitzchak, it didn't contradict anything, but for Avram, it did. The second reason it's harder for Avram is because for Yitzchak, it's a one-time thing. He's going to be killed, and that's it. But Avram has to live with it the rest of his life. He has to live with the fact that his most beloved son isn't there, and that he did action to make his most beloved son there. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second to take the question from Sarah. Shouldn't Avram have explained to his son Shouldn't Avram have explained to his son at 37? He should have discussed it with his son. Okay, that's a great question that Sarah is asking, and she's saying, well, shouldn't he have discussed it with with Yitzchok? So Yitzchok, a little different than in today's day and age, like Susan was saying before, your father says something, you go along, you listen, and you don't really ask questions. And that was part of the test and part of the way that it was supposed to be carried out, that it was also a test for Yitzchak, and he's going to be rewarded for some of the actions. And we'll get into this in the later psukim, in the later passages very soon. Welcome, Anne. We're happy that you joined us. We're in the middle of contrasting the difference between the hardships for Abraham and Yitzchak in binding, we should say, because he doesn't actually sacrifice him at the end of the day, of Yitzchak. Who is it harder for? And we're discussing some of the reasons why it's harder for Abraham now. So another reason why it's harder for Abraham is that Abraham, he did it with happiness. Even though he knew what was happening, Yitzchak didn't know. So he's going along. What do they say? Ignorance is bliss. And that's actually another answer to Esther's question. Shouldn't he have been told? Well, in a way, it's harder. If this is what they're going to do, it would have been harder for him every moment that he knew what was happening. So Avram was being kinder, to Yitzchak by not telling him. But Abraham had a happiness even though, and that was harder for him because knowing the whole time, if it was only for a few moments, it's not so easy. It's not so hard as knowing the whole time, because sometimes you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and you like pump yourself up for that minute. But if you have to keep that pumped for a long time, and we're going to see soon even more, the way that Avram is commanded by Hashem, he gives it over time. He doesn't let him go right away in the instant. He wants him to think about it. He makes it take 3 days. We're going to discuss that soon. So he has all this time to think about it. Even so, he is happy and focused on serving Hashem, with that. And the fourth reason that it's harder for Avram is because it's active. And when you have to actually do something, that's much harder than just being passive. Yitzchak was passive. He didn't have to do anything. And in a certain sense, even though he's giving up his life, the one who actually has to do the deed, that in a sense is harder than the passive role of Yitzchak being killed. Additionally, we discussed this before also, that Avram had to go against everything he believed in, his whole mission and purpose in life, all his preachings that he was telling everyone that we have a God and we have to serve Hashem. He just completely had to go against everything, his entire mission, preaching, everything. And Yitzchak, he didn't go around and preach that. So it would have been more like a quiet thing. He wasn't going against his entire identity. In addition, Avram was going against his nature, because his nature was kindness and giving. And that's he always inviting guests over and feeding them, nurturing and giving, and killing was completely against who he was. And Yitzchak, on the other hand, it says that he was Devorah, he was severity, he was discipline, he was he was the complete opposite of Avram. So Avram was kindness and completely giving, and Yitzchak was more severity, which is judgment, discipline, and so would, according to his nature, was easier for him to do something like this. Now, the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe of Shneur Zalman of Liadi, explains in Tanya that the whole purpose of the test is Avram going to fulfill it with happiness, and is he going to fulfill it with zerizus, doing it fast? Is he going to run to do this and do it with happiness? Because to just do it and schlep through it, no, that's not what he's going to get. That's not the big idea here. The big idea is, will he be able to serve Hashem with happiness and with alacrity, doing it really fast, and which is a sign of happiness. When you're happy to do something, you can run, like they say, if you're not excited about something, if you're not happy, you schlep, you drag yourself, and it takes a long time. But when you're happy and you're excited, boom, you can do it, you can do it fast. So happiness and alacrity go together. So that's the idea. So if everyone wants to just take out a paper and a pen now and just kind of jot down, because we discussed so many different ideas between last class and today, and the class before actually. So we discussed over these 3 days so many ideas of what is a test, and what do you think of when you think of the test of Abraham offering his son as a sacrifice. So if we could just jot down some ideas. So we'll just give like 60 seconds to just kind of think what comes to mind now when you think of Abraham sacrificing his son, the test. Okay, so does anyone want to share some of the things that they wrote down?
Well, this is Shandel. One of the things with a test is you want to please the person who's giving you the test, because you are submitting yourself to the test.
Excellent.
It's about submission.
Yeah, that's great. That's about submission. And that's actually the next idea that we're going to go on to. We discussed all the ideas of test, but we're going to bring in this idea of submission, which we discussed a little bit, but we're going to discuss it and the depth of the submission that went on here and that goes on during tests. So that's a great point, Shandel. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone want to bring out any of the other ideas or anything that comes to mind when you think of a test? Now, hopefully with some new knowledge that we've learned over the last couple classes. Susan, go ahead.
I think it's showing a very strong faith that it seems like Abraham is doing not blind faith. I don't think, I would never call it blind faith. I would say that
just unmute yourself. I just pressed mute off.
Don't
Okay,
worry,
go ahead.
I saw it.
Yeah.
I would say it's not blind faith, but since there had to be a reason, a reason that Abraham did not understand, did not pretend to understand, and he was willing to sacrifice his beloved son, because maybe his son was going to suffer things in the future that Abraham would be pained for him to suffer, to see him suffer.
Right.
So there was, it was a lot more of, it was faith that he was showing his supreme faith of Hashem.
Okay, good. So we have the idea of emunah, of faith. Excellent. Okay, we have the idea of self-sacrifice. We have the idea of choice. He chose to do this. We have the idea that it was good for him. It refined him, made him a better person. He was able to get rewarded. He was able to bring it from potential to actuality. He's able to be, a sign for all the Gentiles. It will later, God could use this to defend the Jewish people. We'll have what to, well, look what Abraham did. Look what, so revealing the essence. We have so many ideas here that were brought out. So now we're going to look inside the pasuk for a minute and focus on, focus on some words here that we said. We looked at this pasuk last class and we said that it says, and Hashem spoke to Abraham, and it just says he spoke to Abraham. And we know that a lot of times when Hashem speaks to someone that he loves, he'll say, Avraham, Avraham. He'll say it twice. We call it a double lashon, we call it the idea of, when you say something twice, it's a sign of love. So over here, Hashem is not doing that. Hashem is only saying it once. And the commentaries, ask this question and they say, why? Why is he only saying it one time? Why is he not showing this extra love over here? And so the Malbim explains, one of the commentaries explains over here, and he says that the reason why he only says it once is because Hashem doesn't want to hasten him. He doesn't want to rush him, because if he's going to rush him, then, what's going to happen over here if he rushes him? If he rushes him, then people are going to say, oh, Avram made a rash decision. Yeah, you're right. He did it for you, but he didn't really mean it. If he would have meant it, maybe he regretted it right afterwards. Maybe he just did it on the fly and he didn't really mean it. So that's the idea that we say over here, that no, Avraham did not make a rash decision, but rather he did it, he did it wholeheartedly. So that's the first point that we're bringing out. And the second point that we're bringing out is that when it says a double wording, Avraham, Avraham, or we have many examples, Yaakov, Yaakov, whatever it may be, it says that the reason why Hashem says it twice is once to prepare the body physically and once to prepare the soul spiritually. And the first step is you have to disconnect from your material, and you have to disconnect from the world. Before you're going to get prophecy, before God is going to speak to you, you have to disconnect. And he calls the soul. That's the second calling, that he's calling to the soul. So first you have to remove the dirty clothing. What do we say clothing? We discussed this in our other class. Spiritual clothing. What's spiritual clothing? Spiritual clothing is my thought, my speech, and my actions. Because clothing protects and expresses. And the way that I protect myself and the way that I express myself is through the things I think, through the things I say, and through the things that I do. And so he said, most people, they first have to remove my thoughts about the physical material world, my speech, my actions, and I have to now put myself in my spiritual. No, but not for Avraham. Avram was already disconnected from the material. He was on such a high level. He was already wearing perfectly spiritual, clean clothing. His thought, his speech, his action, the way he expressed himself was completely spiritual, and he didn't need to. And so what does he respond? Hineni, here I am. I'm ready to go. And he did not need to be called twice like other people need to be called. So now let's look at Pasuk Beis, and let's see what we have over here with what's going to be in Pasuk Beis in verse 2. So I'm going to share screen so you can see. Over here, we have in Pasuk Beis, it says, Vayomer, and Hashem says, oh, one second. I'm not sharing. Let me reshare this because I'm going to share it just that part of the screen. Okay. Okay, good. Now you only see that part, right? That's better. Okay. So over here, Hashem is commanding, and Hashem says, Vayomer, and he says, Kachna es bincha es yechidcha asher ahavta es Yitzchok. please take your son, your only son, whom you love, Yitzchok, Isaac. So why is he giving so many descriptions to him? Why can't he just say, take your son, or simply take Yitzchok? All of this, your son, the only one who you love, that's all extra. He could have just said, please, he could have just shortened it like this. Please take Isaac. Okay, so in other words, he could have left out your son, your only one, whom you love. He could have just shortened all of this, left it out, and just said, please take Isaac. That's it. And go to the land of Moriah and bring him up there as a burnt offering, as a karban. So the commentaries ask about this, and there's many different explanations, but we're just going to give one explanation here. And Rashi explains two reasons. He says, well, reason number one is not to confuse him, because then they're going to say that maybe Avram was unstable, similar to what we said before. Maybe he didn't really mean it. So he says, I'm giving him time to process it. Like, God forbid, if there's bad news or very good news, that's extremely overwhelming. So if there's bad news, you don't just, this is what happens. What happens when there is bad news? When there's bad news, you break it to the person slowly. This is going to be something hard. Let me tell you, and slowly you break it into them. Or even if there's really, really great news, sometimes also you don't want to, you're surprising someone, 50 people that they haven't seen before, all coming to make a surprise party. Slowly you break it to them. And Rashi also explains that he was getting more reward for each expression. So he wanted to give him more and more reward. The more he drew it out, the more reward that Abraham would be able to get. So that was the idea. And we see a very similar thing in the other words here. Achad haherim, one of the mountains that I will tell you. Okay, he tells him go to the land of Moriah, but he does not say go to the land of Moriah and bring him up there for burnt offering. He could have stopped there, but he says on one of the mountains which I will tell you. Why can't he tell him now? Again, suspense, drawing it out to give him more reward. Now, of course, we know that this mountain, HaMoriah, this land where the mountain's going to be, that is Jerusalem. That is Yerushalayim. And how do we know that? Because if you look at the word in Hebrew over here, Moriah, is anyone able to tell me this word over here, Moriah, does anybody know that word from anywhere? Has anyone ever seen that word or something similar to that? Moriah, Morah. Has anyone ever heard of the word Morah? Morah, Morah. Anyone ever heard of that word? You can unmute yourself and share if you did and you think you know what that's about.
Mora is teacher.
Excellent. Morah is a teacher. So he says this is Jerusalem because this is where the place where all the teachings, the Holy Temple was there, and that's where all the teachings come out to the Jewish people. Mor is also a spice, and he says so it also refers to the Holy Temple, the Jerusalem where the Holy Temple is, where they would have spices that would go along with the sacrifices. So that's why it's referring to Jerusalem. And then he says, and you should bring him up. And he uses the word bring up, v'ha'alehu. And instead of this word right over here, v'ha'alehu, and bring up. And the more normal thing would be to say, and slaughter him, v'shachatehu, and slaughter him. But it chooses to use this word, v'ha'alehu, specifically, because he is telling him, actually, Hashem is honest. And it sounds like he wants him to slaughter, but he doesn't actually say the word slaughter because he doesn't really, in the end of the day, he doesn't want him to slaughter him. In the end of the day, he says, go down. And he does not actually slaughter him. So that is the idea that now I want to go back to the first words of the passage. The first words of the pasuk, he says, Vayomer kachni. He could have just said, take your son, but he says the word na. And that is this, please. He asks him, I'm begging you, please. When you say please, it's like, I know it's going to be hard, but please, please, I'm begging you to do this. So let's discuss that. Rashi says on those words, please, he says Hashem is pleading. Why? Why is Hashem pleading with him? For the other tests, he doesn't plead with him. And he says for a very simple reason. Hashem is pleading with him and begging him because he said, Rashi explains, Avraham, if you're not going to pass this last test, it's as if the first ones were not valid. This one, if you pass it, all the other ones are good. If not retroactively, the other ones were worthless. Those of you who were here in the first class we discussed, there were 9 other tests. One of them was him being burned in a furnace. Because they said, if you're not going to agree to serve idols, we're going to put you in the furnace. He did that. And we discussed many other ones, his wife being taken by Paro. We discussed the idea of him going to a strange land, getting a circumcision at 99 years old, a lot of different tests that he went through. Well, all of these tests are going to be worthless if he doesn't pass this test. That's what Rashi says. That's a simple explanation. But we have a very, very big question on this. Does anybody have a question on this commentary of Rashi? That if you don't pass this test, all the previous 9 are worthless. Anyone have a question? Susan?
I find that a little not very, it's not being very human, not being very understanding of. The thing is this, Hashem needed to be positive and certain that Abraham was the right patriarch, was the right person. And how could he test, how could he test him? The final test would be to see if he was willing to sacrifice his son. That's, to me, that's very obvious. Those other tests maybe were just maybe the Jewish people wouldn't consider them very important. This test was the most important. Obviously.
So to say it's the most important, okay, people could agree. It's the hardest. It's the most important. But how could we say that it's going to disqualify the other ones? Why can't he get credit for the other ones? You want to say it's the hardest. You want to say it's most important. You want to say it shows his commitment the most. No problem. But the question that comes out here, that pops out is, why? Why are the first ones going to become invalid if he doesn't do this one? So say fine, he didn't do the hardest one. You know, it's like, imagine there's some obstacle course and you do the first thing. And of course, the last part is the hardest. But everything else you did is worthless now because you didn't do that. Right? He still served God. He still showed his commitment to God.
Maybe it's because it's a complete package. In other words, you're trying to show completion. You're trying to show no matter what comes before me, I will always do what Hashem says. Maybe because it's a complete, it's maybe don't look at it as everything separate, but it's the whole.
It's one thing.
Right.
Right. So, okay. So let's just say that he got a 50 on the test instead, but he's getting a 0. get a 50. This is the most important. It's worth 50% of the test. And the rest, fine, they're only worth, much less. But that's not what Hashem does. And the question is why? So why should the other 9 tests become invalid just because he is not following this test? Furthermore, why is this test mentioned so much more than the other martyrs? Why is it considered so much greater? We have throughout history many, many great people who sacrificed their lives, gave up their lives just to sanctify the name of Hashem, just to sanctify the name of God. For example, Rabbi Akiva, who we mention every Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the 10 martyrs who gave up their life. And especially Hashem spoke directly to Avram here. So in a way, they seem to be greater. Because like we said before, God comes to you personally and tells you directly to serve him and to do something, it's easier than doing it completely on your own. And these other rabbis in the future, in the past generations who came after Abraham, they did it on their own. God didn't tell them personally. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe has a whole, discussion on this. And in this discussion, he discusses he brings in, different points, but I'm going to bring out just the main points because it's, we could spend the whole class just on that. But anyway, so the Rebbe explains, and he says that why is this test invalidating the other tests? And he says, because some people want to give the answer, and the answer is that it's harder to sacrifice a child than oneself. So why, in other words, we're answering that second question. The second question was, why is the test mentioned more and seemingly so much greater than all the other martyrs like Rabbi Akiva, other martyrs, that they can, that this is so much greater than them? And he says, well, maybe because they sacrificed themselves and he sacrificed a child. He says, but nah, this is not a good answer. He brings the answer, but then he says, no go, no cigar. Why not? Because what about Hannah and her 7 sons, right? She led her, everyone knows the story that in the time of the Greeks, in the story of Hanukkah, Hannah, they said, we're going to kill your son if you don't, unless he bows down to this idol. And she said, no, I'm not going to let my son bow down to this idol. She could have just let her son bow down to the idol, but no, she said to her son, no, don't bow down, and watched her son be killed. And that happened a second time, and a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, and a seventh. And she did that. So that she's not the first one to sacrifice. I mean, she didn't take the knife and actually sacrifice, but she could have just thrown the child down in front of the idol and saved him. She did not do that. So essentially, she sacrificed her children, 7 of them. So we have to, that answer is not good enough. So the Rebbe gives the answer, and he says that Avram was the first one to have self-sacrifice. So the first is always the hardest. Okay. When the first person does something, that gives the potential for everyone else to do that in the future. So since Avram was the first to have, we call it Mesiras Nefesh, which means self-sacrifice. Mesiras means giving over of your soul, giving yourself over and just completely putting yourself aside. The natural instinct of every person is, I want to live. And we actually learn that it doesn't have to be actually giving over your actual life. Nowadays, thank God, we're not usually put in that position to give up our life for God, right? In the Holocaust, people were tested with that all the time in the story of Hanukkah throughout the generations. But now we're living more in the time of wealth, where we're not pressed like an olive and squeezed for, bow down to an idol. Most of the world is living in, places and countries that we have freedom of religion. And therefore that could just be giving over your soul, what you want. I would rather be doing this, but no, I'm totally dedicated and only doing what Hashem wants. So he says Avram is the first one. And the first one is much harder. Like it says, Kol haschalais kashais, Kol hatchalot kashot. All beginnings are hard. When you first do something, you have to break through that barrier. And that's what Avram did. So Avram opened this pipeline. He opened this for everybody else. And then once he did it, because he opened the pipeline, it's automatically easier for everybody else. So that's why his Mesiras Nefesh, his self-sacrifice, stands higher above everybody else's. So he brought this power into the world. And now we just need to tap into it. It's different when you're just tapping into something than creating something from scratch. Avram created it from new, and we're just tapping in. So similar, like let's just say someone invents like the first airplane or the first phone, and then other people, make a better airplane, a better phone. You can't compare the first one who created it from scratch. Right? And then other people are just perfecting. Even if someone looks at our phone now, my cell phone that could take pictures and that look, we could see each other, from our phones. We could actually see each other and talk. Like whoever would look back at the first phone and say, whoa, I never thought this would come out of it. But still everything was created from that. And the first breakthrough is always, the strongest. And that enables, we have the phones we have now today, all thanks to the first original. So Avram created something new, and that's why he's getting the point. Let's solve a question. Seemingly, Avram accomplished this first test, not now by the binding of Yitzchok, but when Nimrod, the king, threw him, the first test he ever had, when King Nimrod threw him into the furnace. His father said, you need to bow down to idols, and he came to Nimrod, the king, and said, I don't know what to do with my son. He's not serving idols. He refuses to serve idols. And Nimrod says to Avram, listen, boy, own up, bow down and start serving these idols and stop with all your foolishness, or else I'm throwing you in the furnace. And Avram says, okay, throw me in the furnace. And he went in the furnace, and miraculously God made a miracle and he came out. But he essentially was giving up his life. He was ready to be burned. So what we see over here is that this was not his first time of sacrifice. He was willing to do this already before. So what's going on? Why is this different? So we continue that even if someone gives up their life for Hashem, like Avram did in the case of the furnace, it's still unclear if it's true self-sacrifice. Is it really truthful? Did you really mean it? Did you do it only for the sake of Hashem? And have zero, as we just heard before, that the main idea is submission. I think it was Shandel that shared with us that idea of submission. I said we're going to talk about it later, and this is what I was referring to, that you have pure submission. You are totally given over. So there's given over. I have submission, but it doesn't mean it has to be absolute. And so that's what he says. You know what? When he went into that furnace, it was not absolute submission. It was not what we call bittul b'mitzias. Bittul is submission and nullifying your own self, your own desires, your own, everything about you to Hashem. But there's, nullifying, which is called bittul hayesh. There's nullifying where I still feel myself as an existence. I nullified myself, but not 100,000,000%. And then there is nullification where it is complete, 100%. And he says when he was thrown into the furnace, it was not complete, but by sacrificing his son, offering to sacrifice his son, that was complete nullification, because it's possible that someone could use their intellect in their self-sacrifice. So if my self-sacrifice has some intellect in it, meaning it makes sense, then that's not called complete sacrifice. That's not true sacrifice. So he says that it's possible that anybody, not just Abraham, and a lot of people have sacrificed, not just Jews, a lot of Gentiles out there have self-sacrifice. And they have this self-sacrifice for, they believe that it's better. It's for a purpose. There's some logic there. In other words, I will fulfill my mission better by dying. Okay, for example, the Muslims, right? They say, I will fulfill my purpose better through dying, and that's why I'm willing to die. And that's not real Mesiras Nefesh. That's not real self-sacrifice. Real self-sacrifice is no sense of self. Not I'm filling a higher purpose. There's no logic. There's no feelings. It's not it can't be for any reason, not for an emotional reason, not for an intellectual reason. And so certainly not for fulfilling my purpose. So when Avram was put in the furnace by Nimrod for not bowing down to idols, there was a purpose there. He was going to publicize his belief in God. So it was logical to some extent. There was a purpose there. Yes, he deserves tremendous credit for doing that, but there was some purpose and logic there of publicizing God, which was his mission in life. That's why he didn't go in there. He said, no, my purpose, my goal in life is to publicize to everyone there's a God in the world. So by going in the furnace, he was continuing that. Why was the binding of Yitzchok, the binding of Isaac, different? Firstly, nobody saw it. We're going to see in the later passages that he didn't even he took two lads with him, Yishmael, his other son, and Eliezer, his servant. And he told them when he got close to the mountain, he said, you stay here. And they did not come, and they had no idea what was going on. They didn't know that he was sacrificing Yitzchak. So there was no one to publicize it to. He was going to, offer his son Yitzchak as a sacrifice. No one was going to see it. He was going to come down and no one was going to know. So if his purpose was to publicize God in the world, that wouldn't help here because no one would know about it. And more importantly, the second thing that we want to bring out is that it contradicted, as we spoke before, everything he stood for. His entire purpose was publicizing Hashem. And now he is not publicizing Hashem. He's going against what the Torah tells us to do. So everyone's a hypocrite. You're telling us not to sacrifice our children. You're telling us to believe in God. This is totally contradicting everything you've been preaching. So it was not going to promote the belief in God. And not only was it not going to promote the belief in God, but even more than that, he was now going to sacrifice his son who was going to continue his mission and bring it and continue his mission of spreading God. And now nobody's going to be there to continue his mission. Yishmael didn't believe in this. He was an idol worshiper. He wasn't going to do that. So this is going to have no place in intellect, no place in his mission. It's going to just go completely against his mission of spreading Hashem. So Avram did this binding of Yitzchak, offering him as a sacrifice, only for one reason, because Hashem said so. No logic, no mission, total, complete, 100% nullification and submission. So this was the epitome and the absoluteness of submission. So now we understand why it was greater than other people's missions and why it was greater than his original self-sacrifice. And now we could actually go and answer our original question. And our original question was, Why is this disqualifying? Why does this invalidate all the previous tests? And the reason why this invalidates all the previous tests is because, could anybody guess? It's like a buildup from what we've been learning. And this idea of what we just placed, this information that Avram did it only because Hashem said so. It's complete self-nullification. How could that answer why this would disqualify the others if he failed this test? Anyone have some thoughts? It's very deep and difficult, but I know you ladies are very bright ladies here, so I thought that maybe one of you could put the pieces together, but it is a difficult question I'm asking. Okay, so the previous 9 all fit in with some logic, even if they're really hard tests, but people could say that he did it for logic. Yeah, he went in that, furnace so that everyone will say, there's a God there, you have to follow, you have to, he believes in God so much, he was willing to sacrifice his life for it. Obviously, idols can't be that great, etc. But now it's solely for Hashem. It's not for a purpose, even the purpose of promoting Hashem. That's still a purpose. That's still logic. So offering his son as a sacrifice opened this pipeline to give us the power to have self-sacrifice, absolute self-sacrifice to the deepest, highest level in the future. Because this one was true Mesiras Nefesh. So even though he opened the pipeline by going in the furnace, that wasn't absolute self-sacrifice. That would give us a lower level. So this now gives us, being his descendants, we all have this innate love for Hashem. And in this innate love for Hashem, we have the power of completely giving ourselves over to Hashem beyond logic and beyond anything. And this, what we call Mesiras Nefesh, that every Jew has within them, is only brought out in extreme situations. And actually every day in our davening, we say the Akedah, we read these passages that we're learning now. We actually read them as part of our davening in the morning. Right after we just say our morning, the morning brachos of, thanking Hashem, and right after that, before we actually start the real prayer, we read these verses. It's in the siddur as part of the davening. And that's because, why is it part of our davening every day? It seems so irrelevant to us. It seems so above us. Hashem, halavai, we say, like we wish we could just serve Hashem and do the mitzvahs. Like that'll be good enough, right? This seems so irrelevant that we're going to have a situation. Hashem is not asking me to sacrifice my child. Like, what in the world? Why do I have to say this every day? It seems so irrelevant and so far away from me. But through Avraham, he opened up this pipeline and gave us, all of us, from the generation from Avraham all the way to us, each and every one of us here, and every single Jew in the world, this inner true will to serve God unconditionally, no matter what. And it's usually hidden, though, deep inside. Like if you have a diamond, and the diamond is dirty and covered over in dirt, the diamond's still there. But many Jews nowadays, their soul is so deep inside, covered over, and you need to take off the dirt and scrub it. And we don't always see it. And this innate love is deep down inside of us. And it's not necessarily brought out. It's only brought out in extreme situations. Like it's only aroused when it's pressed. So for example, let's say someone's child is stuck under, something heavy. Let's just say a car. The child is stuck under the car and a person cannot lift. They're stuck under whatever it is, 200 pounds, and they cannot lift 200 pounds, but their child's stuck under there. They get an adrenaline and they're able to somehow lift that 200 pounds. The next day they come back and someone says, I don't believe that you did that. Show me, lift those 200 pounds. You say, I can't. I just can't do it. Only because of the extreme emergency situation where my child was in danger was I able to pull out this inner resource. But that inner resource can only be pulled out in an emergency situation when this is being pressed. So the same thing is here. In general, we don't have this complete, absolute submission to Hashem. We only have it when we're pressed, when we're in a very, very, extreme situation and someone is pressing us. Like there's a very famous story called Yosela the Ganef, Yosela the thief. Now this Yosela was many years ago in Europe, and Yosela was a nice Jewish little boy, but over time, he was an orphan, and over time, due to hardships, he went away from Judaism and he became part of a gang, and he didn't keep kosher and he didn't keep Shabbos, and he didn't even keep anything. He was a thief. He was part of a gang. And he was so far removed, and he was part of this gang. And one day the gang was going to rob the church, and they had different, they were very strategic and they had different roles. And his job was, he was going to go inside the church, grab everything and throw it out the window to the other people, and then they would run away with it. So he was inside, and the priest comes in. They messed up with their timing and they didn't realize, and the priest comes in and he says to him, how dare you steal? Furthermore, how dare you steal from the church? You deserve to be killed, and you are going to be killed. And then he says, but you know what? You have one way out. Could anyone guess what the one way out? This is the priest to this little Jewish boy. He says, you have one way out, that I'm not going to kill you. Convert. And if you convert, then you won't. Meanwhile, all his friends, they all ran away already. No one's there. And he's just alone with the priest. And he says, no, I was born a Jew. I'm going to die a Jew. What? What is going on over here? He doesn't care about Hashem. He doesn't believe in Hashem. He's not keeping Shabbos. He's not keeping kosher. He's not keeping the basic. He's stealing. He doesn't care. He's lying. But no. Because now the stealing, the Shabbos, that was touching outer layers. But now he went to his core. He said, you convert. Don't be a Jew. I said, no. You touched my inner core. You touched the deepest part of me, my innermost. And that, you just pressed, suddenly he's got the power of Mesiras Nefesh. He's got this adrenaline coming in and saying, no, I will die a Jew. And there's many stories like this. I have a friend who, she wasn't religious. Now she is, but she wasn't religious. And at a certain point in her life, she was dating a non-Jew. She was actually engaged. And she had bought him a necklace, like a, what's it called? When you put little different things on it, a charm necklace. And she bought it with the charm necklace. She had brought him, one charm that she really liked. And then it was his birthday and she wanted to buy him something else. And her father said, well, why don't you buy him another charm? So they went to the store, and the only charm that was there was a cross. And her father, she said, oh, what could we do? And he said, well, he's not Jewish. Buy him the cross. And she said, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. So she bought him the cross. Anyways, he would wear it with both. And one time he was only wearing the cross. And she just started yelling at him, take that thing off. Why are you wearing that? And she's like, I don't know what was going on. Like, I bought it for him. But he's looking at me like, okay, we've got a problem here, because didn't you buy this for me? Anyways, to make a long story short, when she became religious, she broke up with him, and, she ended up becoming religious and marrying a nice Jewish guy. But she said only years later, when she learned this concept that we're learning right now, she said, I realized what happened. I literally was like, what got into me? I felt like there was a devil in me screaming. It wasn't me. And she said years later, she realized when it was coming to it was just the cross, and she's about to marry, someone with a cross, a non-Jew. that's when her pintel yid, we call it the this innermost essence, love for God, was pressed on and woke up, and she was able, to say that. So we're going to end here, and we're going to finish up. We actually discussed most of the core topics already, because in the beginning, it's all about the test, and we really discussed most of the topics, but we'll go through the rest of the passages next time and shed some light on the other points on Thursday, which is our last class of this series. So I hope to see everybody then. Have a great day. Any questions before I log off? Okay, have a great day.
Everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Laura.